Hi, everybody. We're more than halfway done through the semester, and I can't tell you how much I've really enjoyed learning with and from you this semester. I want to thank all of you for signing up to have either a conversation over the phone or over Skype, and let those of you with whom I've already had a chance to connect tell you how much I've really enjoyed it. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to all of you during the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. So before we begin to talk about Unit 6, I want to just talk a little bit about the second reflection paper that's due next week. I want to remind you that the prompts are just that, prompts. You don't have to answer every question. There are just too many of them, but you do need to ensure your paper is thoughtful, thorough, and connects to the week's readings. And the paper must be no less than 3 pages and no more than 4. The purpose of this reflection paper, like the previous one, is to connect your attitudes and experiences to our learning and readings. In this case, in this paper, you're reflecting on your personal schooling experiences and backgrounds so that you might uncover potentially unknown attitudes, biases, and emotions. And there are a number of reasons that we've talked about over the last few weeks that it's so important for us to increase our self-awareness as educators. It's partly because we know that our emotions are expressed often through nonverbal cues, so we need to be hyper aware of how we express our feelings and biases. And this is really hard to do. As we know, our biases often remain invisible to us, and they're only really exposed through practicing self-awareness. So I hope this paper helps us do that by allowing us to increase our mindfulness, which is an awareness of our own behavior and others, helps us practice self-monitoring. What actually tips us towards defensiveness and why? And also increases our awareness of how and when our assumptions and expectations are made and expressed. For example, some of us went to school in the United States at a time when children were understood and assessed as individuals, and compare this to a family systems theory approach to education. So if that were the case, how might then our personal schooling experiences impact, knowing or unknowingly, our approaches to pedagogy, our responses to families, and our expectations of our own personal competencies and those of our families? Because we know that our own personal experiences and backgrounds influence how we see everything else. Everything is filtered through our experiences, and we really want to uncover what those filters might be. Okay, so now we're going to begin with Unit 6, Building Relationships and Trust. This week, I hope, will build upon our understandings of effective communication strategies and theories of families by examining the different ways in which educators can build trust, encourage productive encounters, and also, I hope, will identify points of connection as well as difficulties with families. This week, we're going to examine 2 case studies through which we can consider our theories in a real-world setting. And we'll also read 2 articles that I hope offer different strategies for meaningful collaboration. So a few points to consider while we do our readings and videos. The National Standards for Parent-Family Involvement program points out that when it comes to parent involvement and its powerful influence, the knowledge base is broad and clear. That is, parent-school partnerships are absolutely essential. The challenge then comes in transforming this knowledge into practice and then the practice into results. So we know that schools that work well with families have improved teacher morale and higher ratings of teachers by parents. So it not only helps families, but it's been proven that it really helps us too as educators. Yet, a major obstacle to creating parent-school partnerships is a lack of instruction on parent and family involvement that educators and administrators receive in their professional training. And I hope then this class helps with that at least a little bit. The article points out that different types of parent-family involvement produce different gains. To have long-lasting gains, though, for students, parent involvement activities must all be well-planned, inclusive, and comprehensive. And we know that the benefits of involving parents is not just confined to the early years. There are significant gains at all ages and all grades. And part of the reason this is important to note is I think in general, early childhood education is stronger in their willingness to engage parents. And as children get older, this begins to lessen. But the research has shown that it's important whether you're in pre-K or in 12th grade. The most accurate predictor of a student's achievement actually in school isn't income or social status, but the extent to which that student's family is able to create a home environment that encourages learning, communicates high yet reasonable expectations for their children's involvement in future careers, and most importantly to us, whether they're able to become involved in their children's education at school and in the community. This week's readings and videos also remind us how vulnerable it can make parents feel when we communicate to them our concerns about their child. Sometimes on the surface, parents can appear disinterested or even angry. We've all heard, I think, a number of times, "You are the teacher, just take care of it." Yet when parents communicate their frustration, anger, and or blame, they actually might be feeling shame, overwhelmed, and powerless. And the week's readings offer just 2 suggestions to help mitigate this. It's really important to build a relationship of trust before we begin sharing concerns. And one way to do this, I suggested, was to do home visits or make regular phone calls and emails. And remember, the point of this is to solicit information, not share your experiences first. We talked a lot about the importance of seeking first to understand and then to be understood. Another important point is avoid making the child the problem. It's really important to separate the behavior from the child. So it's not a stubborn child, but a child who sometimes exhibits stubborn behaviors, for example. It's really important to avoid automatically giving in if we don't agree with a parent as well. And we really need to be willing to learn from parents, as I can see all of you are. The articles press us not to assume or communicate that we know it all and are there to educate the parents. The video we're watching this week, Building Relationships and Trust, also reinforces this idea, imploring us to see both parents and teachers as knowledgeable and competent. A few more points to consider. This week's readings and videos reinforce the importance of practicing self-awareness so that we can suspend reactivity. And this is something you might want to address in your papers this week as well. For example, being aware of our own vulnerabilities helps us to avoid lashing out in anger or frustration, which is one example of reactivity. The suspension of reactivity that's so important often can require that we do something called going to the balcony. The phrase comes from William Ury's book, Getting Past No, and in it he emphasizes the importance of being self-aware and making choices about how we respond in difficult situations. Ury suggests that the first step to going to the balcony is don't react. The balcony then is a metaphor for a mental attitude of detachment. Once we're on the balcony, we can calmly evaluate the conflict almost as if we were a third party. We can think constructively from both sides and look for a mutually satisfactory way to resolve the problem. It gives us a bit of fresh air and potentially a fresh perspective. Or he explains that when we don't go to the balcony and instead allow ourselves to be reactive, we risk doing one of three things. We strike back, fight fire with fire, and give them a taste of their own medicine. We give in. Sometimes we're intimidated and appease unreasonable people under the illusion that if we give in just this one last time, we will get them off our back. Heywood Broun famously said that an appeaser is someone who believes that if you keep on throwing steaks to a tiger, the tiger will eventually become a vegetarian. And we break off. A third common reaction is to break off relations with the difficult person or organization. So what does it look like then when we actually go to the balcony? Well, one of the things we might do is pause and say nothing. We obviously can't eliminate our feelings, nor do we need to. We only need to disconnect the automatic link between emotion and action. We can rewind the tape, slow down the conversation by playing it back. Tell your counterpart, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying, and you can review the conversation up to that point. We can take a timeout. A timeout gives both sides a chance to cool off and go to the balcony. Don't make important decisions on the spot. After we've suspended our initial reactions, we can now consider the decision in a more objective fashion on the balcony. And remember, the first thing we need to do in a negotiation or difficult conversation is not to control the other person's behavior, but to control our own. Okay, so now we get to a few questions and prompts for this week's discussion board. The first is that the national standards for parent involvement talk about using the word parent when talking about parent involvement. And I'm curious about what you think about that approach. Why do you think it's so easy to talk about going to the balcony, but so difficult to do so when we're actually faced with a difficult situation? The first time I heard about going to the balcony, I thought, well, this is obvious. Why do I need to think about this? And then when I became more aware of my actual interactions with difficult families or when I was engaged in difficult conversations, I realized, in fact, that this was a challenge I needed to address. After reading Eric Greer, I'm curious about your thoughts on the following questions. What are the assumptions being made by Charlene and Dana? Are they being communicated, and how? What are the pros and cons of Charlene's decision to speak frankly with Dana? Consider issues of power when answering this question. Place your reading of Eric Greer within the context of an ecological model of the family. In what ways would this theory help Charlene respond differently to both Dana and to Eric? All right, I look forward to another wonderful discussion, to reading your papers when you turn them in next week. And again, if you have any questions about the discussion board leader responsibilities that are coming up in the next few weeks, don't hesitate to contact me. All right, thank you. Take care.